Okay, e4. The black pieces. What do we like? What should we play? All right, I'll play c5. We'll see what kind of Sicilians we might be able to get. d3. Well, I'll sort of play a Sicilian like this. At this point, it's going to be a closed Sicilian, so at this point, I can kind of pick any Sicilian that I'd like to play. But I'm going to go for one with Fianchetto here. He's going for something easy as well. Because I see the system that he's choosing is really, like, non-threatening. It's tempting for me to, you know, take the center like this. I'll definitely start with knight c6. It's always going to be a good move. A little late on the old d4 there, bud. Well, now that I've got 3 different things attacking d4, white felt it was time to play it. He was totally fine to just castle there, honestly. So he's played d4. I mean, like I said, I've got 3, he's got 2. That's pretty easy math. Only question is, how do we take it? So say, like, almost for sure with the pawn here. Knight takes, bishop takes. It leaves the pawn structure intact, but I'll tell you the main reason why I don't like having my bishop out here is because if I play knight f6, my bishop looks stupid and it might even be trapped or something. Something bad is going to happen. I need the bishop to go back there. So I don't like the idea of doing this. White castles, and I know that I need to waste time playing bishop back to g7. So it's going to cost me time to undo that, and that's a lot of tempi. That could be quite significant, actually. So I don't like the idea of the bishop going there and back, and then that already simplifies how I'd like to capture tremendously, because if I take with the knight, and the knight takes, then the pawn takes back. And would I rather have our 2 knights here and the pawn there, or the 2 knights off the board? I'd rather have the knights on the board. So I'm going to take with the pawn here. So it's never the case that I would, like, not win the pawn. I'm definitely going to win this pawn here. But it's about which piece I want to take it with. And you would never, ever, ever consider bishop takes first, because then you lose your bishop. That would be the worst of all the choices. So I wonder, I mean, maybe he'll play c3, kind of turn it into a, almost like a Mora or something. So he castled. That's definitely a very good move. Getting the king to safety. He really shouldn't have just played d4 at all, but he did. Mistakes happen. But then he castled. That's a good one. So now e5 is definitely available to safeguard the pawn, but the move that I'm looking at first is probably knight f6, just to attack this guy. I know that knight d2 by white would be a concession. I also know that bishop d3 by white would be a bit of a concession, because now the queen's not hitting the pawn. So knight f6, this pawn's not easy to defend. If you let me win it, I absolutely will next turn. And if you push e5, then after knight g4, I'm also completely, yeah, there's no way to defend that enough times. So I like knight f6 here, because these moves to defend the pawn look really bad. Knight d2 looks really bad for white. And like I was saying, if he pushes, I wanted to play knight g4. And now, instead of having double pawns and an extra pawn here, Now I'm going to win this, and even if he wins the d pawn, I'll still be up 1 pawn, and it'll be a healthy pawn. So now I've won both of his center pawns. I'm very happy about that. Whoa. All right. Knight g5. So like he's castled and he's played h3, but somehow he's like missing all his center pawns here, and it's not making a very good impression. So h6 is the first and most obvious move that has come to my mind. I cannot even think of a reason why I wouldn't do it. I really can't. I like h6 because if knight e4, then d5 comes with tempo. And like, if he wants to go right back exactly where he just moved from, then it means his last couple moves were a bit of a waste. I also know when he goes here that he might be intending f4 and maybe f5 or something. So I'm kind of attracted to the idea of making him return there. Yeah, and this is what I thought was the most likely move, and that's why I played h6, because now I get to do this with a tempo, which is really, really pleasant. And yeah, at this point, pretty much everything on my end has happened with tempo. Just really, really nice. I think we'll go queen b6. Just keeping up this tempo game. Definitely we could castle, and I plan to do that, but for the moment I'm just going to keep gaining time on these pieces. Knight d3. I think I'll grab it. Seems simple enough. Most likely bishop takes, but you know, the pawn or the queen could take back. He takes with the queen. I would probably go so far as to say that's a mistake. We want a castle, but I really like the idea of e4 as a threat, so it stops this. And our next move will be castling for sure. The bishop can go to e6 to defend. The rook can come to d8. I don't see any weaknesses here. We also gained so much time compared to our opponents, so we're really nicely developed here. And we're going to castle next with no foreseeable issues. Yeah, bishop f5 is a great tempo. For me, I may want to kick the queen with a move like e4. Like, I want to get this pawn here before he maybe plays something like f4. So now if he plays f4, a move like e4 will just be cataclysmic. But castles, bishop to one of those squares, rook to the middle, e4. This looks really unpleasant for white. He's facing a mass of pawns, and it's all because he lost his two center pawns. He lost his d pawn for free. He lost his e pawn for free. It didn't have to be for free, but that's what ended up happening. Let's castle. We don't need to be dilly-dallying in the center any longer. Knight b5, I mean, kind of threatening a whole lot of nothing. Knight d6 is maybe the scariest looking move, but knight d6 might actually just lose the knight. You know, if he goes knight d6, I go bishop e6. Where's the knight going? I'm just going to attack it next turn. We don't have to go a6 here, but it's certainly one of the options that makes the most sense. Because if he does not play knight d6 and goes back, I mean, that's just what the heck was your plan even? You go there and you just go right back? That doesn't make sense. So I'm almost positive he's going to play here. But once he goes there and I move bishop e6, it's kind of like, what's next? You know, your plan has reached its conclusion. He's really probably struggling right now the way all chess players struggle. Let me know if this is relatable for you, but you move a piece somewhere and then your opponent makes a move. It could be any move. And you know, straight up, you know that the best move is to move your piece back where it just came from. But understandably, there's a certain amount of ego involved with moving your piece right back where it came from because you look stupid. And if you move it to a new square, it's like, just as I designed. Ah, yes. Knight d6, just as I drew up in the locker room. Ah, yes. According to plan. You could and you should just move the knight back to a3. Just admit a small defeat. However, the ego steps in and says, hey man, we're gonna look awful right now. Don't be doing this to me. There's people watching. Move that knight to d6 like a man. And you're like, okay, fine, knight d6. I can't argue with that. All right, we're gonna play bishop e6 here. Develop our bishop. Knight b4, tempting to hit the queen, very tempting, but knight takes c8 hits our queen, and it actually rescues the knight, so to speak. So just going to develop my piece. Now I'm threatening knight b4. I'm also just threatening a basic move like rook d8. And I don't see a way that this knight is getting out. It might exist, but it's for a better man than me to find. a3 is a great looking move. It stops knight b4. So I commend him on that, because it really does look like he saw knight b4 and played this move to prevent it. So I'm definitely happy to see that. But stopping this was not the only way you were losing your knight, right? I think rook d8 is a very, very simple kind of move. I'm just not going to complicate things. We'll just go for that. And it's like, okay, hang on here. All the squares you might want to go to are covered. This is one of those ones where, you know, the engine will no doubt want this rook to move there so that white doesn't have knight b7 and queen takes a6. Whereas, you know, the human in me is like, well, let me just move the better rook here. Right? Because this one is the better rook to move so that this rook is situated perfectly for rook e8 or f5, e4, all this sort of stuff. So I'm almost positive queen c7, other rook, lots of better ways to maybe have done that. But if those are the types of mistakes that you're worried about making in your games, you're fine. You're in a good spot. I wouldn't be worrying. I wouldn't be worrying. All right, the queen's in the center of the board. It's for sure time to take advantage of its placement. So f5, first idea that comes to mind. Bishop f5 and bishop d5. Those are the three moves I would consider here. Bishop f5 does seem to win the c2 pawn, so already I'm very drawn to that move. That one looks extremely strong. So that looks like the best move so far. Bishop d5, I mean, all moves are going to be great. Let's say the queen goes back, e4, queen goes back. Like, it's a good move, but bishop f5 seems seems very simple. Just win a pawn, and then we'll have the d pawn ready to roll down the board. f5 is the other option, but it seems very similar to this move. So I am gonna go for bishop f5, and then take this pawn, and then yeah, d3, d2, d1 looks tough to meet. There's an attractive quality about just pawn storming everything forward, but I have to admit, winning another pawn is quite tempting here. And it's not just because I want to win a pawn, it's because I see it actually unlocking a very easy plan to march that guy up the board. All right, queen h4. So definitely a threat here in bishop takes h6, which means I'm most likely about to play the move g5. It hits the queen and it deals with bishop h6. So not gonna look into it more than that. All right, bishop takes g5. Well, our first move is going to be obvious at least. The reason I'm not particularly scared of this is I know my opponent only has one piece that can really do damage to my king. And is this queen and this bishop really going to win the game for him? I'm going to say probably not. Our bishop's attacked. I still think bishop takes on c2 is the right idea, but we could move the bishop just about anywhere here. Yeah, like I said, I just don't really see how this guy and this bishop on e2, this queen are really going to do anything. So I'm going to go hunting for that pawn that I was going to take anyway. Still have this idea. All right, I don't think I'm going to let up. I'm going to continue with my plan of pushing this pawn. Bishop d1, and this is obviously a great move for me to see because that bishop trading means it's only the queen that can really hurt my king here, and it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So a couple moves here. Queen takes b2, hitting the rook. Definitely a fantastic move. That move seemingly forces this bishop to move to defend the rook or take, all of which seems to benefit me. Then the other really nice move is knight d4, because if the bishop takes, my opponent actually loses the queen there. So knight d4 makes a very strong impression, and one of the reasons why I like knight d4 is because if my opponent gets out of the way, makes it so that this fork doesn't work by whatever means. There's also the follow-up knight b3, which kind of traps the rook, and knight d4, it comes with threats here, plus I can still take b2 afterwards. So knight d4 looks like just a great way to start, and of course, a very, very high likelihood of bishop takes bishop, knight f3, check. And the funny thing about my plan there of knight f3 is that if you take me, it works. But if I take you, it also works. And it's not easy to notice that was the sneaky intention of knight f3 because the bishop used to be covering that. I think I'm just gonna push all the way here. Yes, there's a hanging pawn, but I think just pushing is the simplest. Queen takes. And, you know, rook b1 I can even just take and promote the pawn. It won't be the best possible continuation, but for me it's the simplest by far because now I'm just sitting here with 3 pieces to my opponent's none. Take, and we'll just cut this king off like that, and this should make the checkmate a lot easier to obtain. And rook here. I was gonna say if he played king there, then bishop here and rook mate, but as it stands, we'll be able to just bring the rooks down the board just like that and deliver a checkmate with 2 rooks, which surprisingly is not one that you get to deliver too often in chess. It's almost always a queen mate or a queen and rook or something. So my opponent just blundered early, right? d4. We played a Sicilian. I went for g6, which is more like a dragon Sicilian. But again, my opponent was not playing anything aggressive here. I thought he was just going to castle. Instead, he blundered a pawn. And then knight f6 I'm a big fan of because of knight takes e4. And I already explained bishop d3, knight d2, queen d3, this knight to d2. All those moves seem like they're not very good. So e5, but then yeah, you kind of lose the thread there. Yeah, and knight b5, knight d6, and unfortunately once the knight gets in there, it's trapped, and yeah, there's not really anything you can do after that. So it was really like one pawn blunder in the middle, and then knight f6 provoked a second pawn blunder. Losing 2 of your center pawns, I know they're just pawns, but I would say losing both your center pawns for free is about as bad as losing a piece. Might sound strange to say, but I really believe it. In terms of your understanding. And then, yeah, once you lose the piece, then this game was just dead. But oh, we played a Sicilian here. I went for a sort of dragon Sicilian with g6, bishop, g7. But this is already a closed Sicilian setup for white, so not terribly ambitious. And as black, we could have done a number of things. e6, d5. If he didn't play d4 and instead he castled, maybe what would I have done? If I'm playing it more like a dragon, I would probably just play d6. I think knight f6 is a good start here. So probably one of those 2 moves, castle. Maybe bishop g4 to trade the knight. But knight f6 and d5, if he's really just not even touching the center aggressively, I'll probably want to play the move d5 at some point. GG. Up to 679. 697 rather. Yeah, up to 697. Almost touching the 700s. Ooh.